Okay, good morning or end of the morning, everybody. We are here for this small conference and webinar on silent agroecology, examples from Bolivia and Europe. And I have the pleasure to have here Georgina Catagora Vargas. She's the president of SOCLA, so the Latin American Scientific Society for Agroecology, and also from the Bolivian Catholic University in Bolivia. Well, I myself, Alexander Wetzel, Director of Research here at ISARA and also Vice President of Agroecology Europe. So this conference is co-organized by the Center for Living Agroecology and Food Systems here at ISARA and also Agroecology Europe. So it's a joint webinar. So what we will do together with Georgina, I will give a small intro into agroecology and this question of silence. Then Georgina will present about silent agroecology with different examples from Bolivia. And I will finish with giving some examples of invisible or hidden agroecology in France and in Europe. So the historical development of agroecology started in 1930s. At the beginning, it was purely science. And then from the 1970s onwards, it started to have parallel thing, or what we can call the three elements of agroecology. On the one side, a movement while science continued, and then also the development of different practices, which are now known under the term also agroecological practices. And this to say, this is really more from a European perspective. And Georgina will later say also how it is more from an Latin American perspective. So how did it continue? Well, we have movement, science, and practice, but there is a lot of interrelations and interactions now between them, between these three main elements, because there are people which are in science, but also in the movement. There are examples of the practices, but which are analyzed by science. So finally, we have much more crossover. And today, we have some visible and many invisible cases of agroecology, and that's the ones we want to talk about with you. And we have today already quite a increasing development of agroecology in the world. So on the one side, while we have many things now happening in Africa, on the top left, you see, well, for example, the African Food Security, Food Sovereignty for Agroecology Coalition. In the middle and top and right, different things in Southeast Asia, the Agroecology Learning Alliance, or the Agroecology in Southeast Asia program platform, which is managed by CIRAD here in France. On the bottom left, SOCLA, well, from where Georgina is coming from. And on Europe, one example is just there is since 2024, now at the European level, funded by the EU Commission and also by different member states, the European Partnership in Agroecology Living Labs and Research Infrastructures. But silent agroecology, just we want to acknowledge that it's not an invention or a new idea from our side. There was an article in 2021 which used the term silent agroecology, which was on the significance of unrecognized socio-technical changes made by French farmers, by Véronique Lucas. And that was an analysis of the so-called CUMA in France, which is equipment sharing farmer groups, and their development of new practices and also or adaptation, and especially to increase autonomy. This allowed also some ecological developments, but which was rarely spoken about, and then remaining with this in sort of a silent nature. So what exists being agroecology, but not directly named or seen or visible? And with this, we will start now with the examples from Bolivia.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. And also good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I would like to start saying thanks to the ones who are here to make time to share this time for this reflection, and also to ISARA class, and particularly to you, Alexander, for the invitation. What I am going to share now briefly is work and a reflection in progress that I presented also in another meeting where we met with Alexander, and from there is where he asked me to share some of these reflections. And this is silent agroecology, some examples from Bolivia. And the objective of this presentation is to reflect on some of the ways in which, meaning the how and where, silent agroecology is being shaped. And I'm going to use a few examples from Bolivia. And for that, this presentation is organized in 5 short sections. One, a brief introduction, then some symptoms of so-called silent agroecology, then the effects, some implications, and the way foreseen forward that this is particularly to the case in Bolivia. Please. A brief introduction and what the definition of silence says. Well, the Cambridge Dictionary tells us different meanings of what silent is, and I am going to refer to one, which is the doing something or happening without being noticed. And here the unnoticed part is what is relevant to this discussion. And here, I'm going to use the well-known metaphor of the iceberg to point out what is noticed and the seen versus the unnoticed or unseen that remains silent. And in this metaphor, well, it's very, very useful to illustrate that as we see, the unnoticed is the majority of the whole body, is also what it provides depth and stability to the seen processes, and also ground on which the seen, the noticed part lies. And in this unnoticed section, so there are many processes, many actors, not only agroecology. And here I would like to mention two. First, the conservation and sustainable use that indigenous peoples and local communities implement. And perhaps you may know the IBES report, global report, the report of the Intergovernmental Science and Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services that brought to light the very important role, not yet.
Yeah.
Sorry. The very important role that indigenous peoples have in the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. Although that the role and the work that indigenous peoples do in the conservation of biodiversity is still remains highly unknown, mostly neglected, not only on their roles and actions, but also in relation to their rights. And that's something very, very important. And within indigenous peoples, there are also many unnoticed actors, like those whose livelihoods depend on pastoralism, fishing, artisanal fishing, gathering from the wilderness, etc. So this unnoticed portion is certainly crucial, and having silenced many important actors. A second example I would like to bring is in relation to small-scale farming and its relevance in provision of local food. And in this small-scale farming, it's important to highlight women and youth. And then, of course, in this unnoticed section is our ecology, and there we can go to the next, please. And having agroecology in this silent section is related to different aspects and what I'm calling up the symptoms of being silent agroecology. One of those symptoms is that are the not proper methodologies to characterize and evaluate the roles and contributions of agroecology. We know that mostly the methodologies are focused on productivity, monetary valuation, which are important, but are very problematic when become the key or restrictive normative indicators, and most of the times using the inadequate comparators, leaving aside the many different expressions of our ecology, but also the social, economic, ecological contributions of our ecology beyond monetary contributions. So is one of the symptoms. Another symptom is the type of official data and it results from the other one. There are not statistical information about it, and when it is considered some certain data, it's mostly limited to that agroecology and organic farming that is either certified by third party or that it has participatory guarantee systems, PGS, that in Latin America are very common. And lately, they have been institutionalized by the states, giving lots of bureaucracy to the processes, making many farmers and associations, because participatory guarantee systems are not provided to individuals or families, but associations. Many of them decide not to continue because it's either expensive, very bureaucratic, and all those whose dynamics are not considered in the official dynamics are left out from the official data. Also, this data does not consider the different levels of, I'm going to say in Spanish, agroecologización, and I don't know if in English it makes sense to say agroecologization or something like that, but referring to the processes of making more robust the process of reaching this maturity in agroecology. And this does not relate necessarily to the different stages of transition that we are very used to, the Glisman proposed stages. And that's because not everyone starts from the same point. And not all the different systems are agroecological or potentially agroecological start in phase 1 or 2 because they are already advanced, and that's something that I'm going to address in the next slide. So those are not considered yet in this type of official data. There is no consideration of these different levels of our ecological maturity, as I was mentioned before. And also, there is no consideration of the practice of indigenous peoples, local communities, particularly peasants, in our ecology. And from there, with this point, I would like to go to the next one that Alexander already anticipated. And I would like to say that indigenous, at least in Latin America, and I would say in the global South, where still or the indigenous nations and First Nations are still very vibrant and very, very diverse and are very much part of our basically daily dynamics in many, many countries. We recognized and we propose this historical recognition of the diversity of our ecological practice that comes much before than the academic writing of disciplinary knowledge on our ecology. And in this interaction of science and practice being part of the livelihoods. So becoming already a very concrete and integral proposal of how to interact with landscapes and territories. So in this, it's very important, the recognition of this historical biocultural management of ecosystems and agroecosystems by indigenous communities and peasant communities, because otherwise that will contribute to keep these very important actors in the silent part, in the unnoticed part. And with time, through anthropological, sociological research, and lately with the more integrative, more the social ecological studies, we go in these proposals that are the dialogue of wisdoms, the interscientific dialogue, transdisciplinarity, that help us to recognize all this trajectory of contribution that indigenous peoples have done. Let me put some examples. In our countries, when we talk about soil conservation, water management in relation to infrastructure, dynamic social organization, bioindicators, crop associations, very much it's based on indigenous knowledge. And it really makes the transition for the ones who are not locals easier, faster. And the fact that indigenous peoples have used different methods and methodologies and developed different skills, that doesn't mean that it's not science. It is actually science, but it's organized and documented in different ways, even in non-written formats, and that doesn't mean that it's not science. And let me put an example of that. Domestication. Domestication is a very important example on how a meticulous and organized observation from indigenous peoples, peasants communities have developed in a very complex socio-ecological, territorial practices that is very important to recognize. Being said that, I would like to briefly go to the next slide to just emphasize that in this discussion and in this unnoticed zone, women, youth are generally unnoticed because they are dispersed, because they manage very small plots of area, because they don't have recognized or implement the rights to land or credit, etc. And we have done, well, there are many different initiatives to recognize these contributions of women and to let them out of from this unnoticed portion together with youth in different publications. And I would like to say, referring to the one that is in the middle, referring to Women and Sustainable Ecosystem Management, literature review that we made with a small team of colleagues. It's very impressive to see, although we are talking more about women, gender approach, intergenerational approach, the literature still does not reflect the diversity of roles that women assume, and even less in relation to youth, and even less in relation to children. So that's a very important gap of knowledge that we also need to address in order to decrease the unnoticed and increase the recognized ones. That leads me, still in the symptoms, because the symptoms are very important. All this, what I mentioned, is very much context related. It's not happening in a ecological, socioeconomic, political vacuum, but it's very much interlinked with other broader processes. And here, with other colleagues, we are proposing, recognizing this context and the complexities of this context, to have also an approach to our ecology and ecological transitions from a political economy perspective, because there are many barriers from the context that prevent our ecology to move forward. And part of the context also is this invisibilization of different processes and actors. Now, going to the effects. What are the effects of this silent agroecology? Well, first, and as also linked with what I mentioned before, is the underestimation of the role and contributions of many actors and of agroecology itself, particularly when compared with actors and processes related to industrial agriculture or certified, third-party certified production. And there, when I was referring to the proper choose of comparators, for instance, and there are also, I'm not going to go in depth on this because of time, but here is a very important methodological discussion on how we generate the information, how we generate information that actually help us to see the whole integrative and organic approach that our ecology has. Then there is no recognition of actors. As a result, the combination between this underestimation of contributions and the invisibilization of actors, there is little or scattered recognition in policies. And I'm going to refer this to my country, but I would say that generally speaking, Latin America is the case. The policies about our ecology are scattered, are weak, very much fragmented, much focused on certification, mostly third-party certification, or bio-input production and fiscalization of our ecology, including participatory guarantee systems, instead of promotion of our ecology. And that also reflects in very little public funding allocation. And I can tell you, and this is embarrassing, but in Bolivia, 0.0 0.07% of the budget for agriculture is allocated for agroecology. And that just proves that in our country, in the global south, agroecology has these great advances because of the commitment of people, because we basically don't have at least public funding that can support these initiatives. It's changing. I'm going to briefly mention that, but this is the generalized reality. And this also has some implications. Implications in the sense that to address this hidden agroecology, we need to have a very deep and honest reflection on the methodologies that we are applying. Also, a recognition and inclusion, active inclusion of actors and the processes that they implement. Also, the revisions of the narratives around agriculture and those actors, and also in relation to what are the indicators that we are using to help them to be noticed, or that we are perhaps contributing to remain unnoticed. Finally, the way forward, that's in relation to Bolivia. Currently in Bolivia, it's been the process is we are in the process of developing the national agroecology strategy that has different, very different and positive attributes. I would like to stress in three. One is from a food system perspective, because we know agriculture itself, agroecology particularly, does not restrict to the plot, does not restrict only to food production, which is very important, but dynamizes a whole system, dynamizes the management of landscapes and territories. And here we are focusing more on food system perspectives. This is a multi-actor process. For the time being, almost it will be when we finish the process, perhaps 1,000 different people would have participated in the different processes we are carrying out. It has an intercultural perspective, including also indigenous peoples, because indigenous peoples in my country, I can say that that's one of the findings of the process, manage large areas of systems that have a very important level of agroecologization, of what I was saying before, very close to what we see agroecology is. Also, it has a gender perspective, intergenerational focus, and it's a long-term. Well, it's 10 years, it has a 10 years perspective, and for Bolivia, that's quite long-term. And in this process, we aim to articulate the different sectors, not only agriculture, but environment, education, health, planning, economy, different sectors that are very important to lift up agroecology in the full dimension that it requires. But here it's very important to say that a disclaimer, that doesn't mean that policy is going to solve all these issues. It's just one contributor to amplify agroecology. With this, I would like to say, well, thanks for listening. And now we'll go back to Alexander.
Thanks, Georgina, for this part for Bolivia more. Well, I will present now about some cases from France and Europe, and I have a little bit less colorful, nice photos than Georgina. So I will start with, well, Georgina was already speaking about data, so I will speak about certain things which could be recognized as fully or partly agroecology or not. So one classical thing in Europe, often if we speak about agroecology, many people speak first about organic agriculture. And if we look at the European scale, well, if we look at farm hectare numbers, for example, we can say on the organic, we have already a little bit more than 10% on the organic farming, which doubled in the last 10 years. The target, the target overall in Europe is 25 in 2030, which was defined by the European Green Deal's Farm to Fork strategy. But so far, if you look at the right, there is only one country, Austria, which reached it already, being beyond 25%. If you look in the middle with the EU, just below, you see France and Germany, which are around 10%. So you see also a large percentage or low percentage in many countries, which can still make a progress. But the question is, can we count hectares under organic agriculture as hectares under agroecology? A more controversial topic might be on conservation agriculture. So conservation agriculture has three main core principles. So minimum soil disturbance, maintenance of permanent soil cover, so mainly with cover crops, diversification of plant species, which is mainly done with crop rotations. But if you look at publications, and I did this in the last days a little bit, oh, there are many, well, the numbers are unclear. So again, we have a problem with the data and not much newer ones. So I just pick out Italy, which you see on this graph there a little bit without looking at the numbers. But Italy in 2013, in two different publications, on the one side had 380,000 hectares under conservation agriculture, or 80,000 only. And in 2020 then, 283,000 hectares. And if you look at the right side, the graph, that was from 2013 data. You have Finland, for example, which had up to 7%, which was considered under conservation agriculture. Some other countries also well, between 3 to 5, and others almost nothing. But the big question is, what can be under, if we speak about conservation agriculture or hectares under conservation agriculture, what can be counted for as agroecology? Because under conservation agriculture, and that's the most controversial topic within conservation agriculture and agroecology, I think, is that many farmers use the no-till system with herbicides and glyphosate in Europe. Often that's one of the key controversial topics. So with having in the data these hectares with a relatively high share, and well, to my opinion, this type of conservation agriculture practice is not agroecological. Then a more European thing under the Common Agricultural Policy. So we have these eco schemes which are now in place since 1.5 years. And there agroecology is specifically mentioned. So it's for sustainable land use, rewarding farmers for taking care of the climate, landscapes, environment, and animal welfare, and with adopting practices that minimize a negative impact on the environment from agriculture, on the environment and the climate. So there is an application of these eco schemes in some of the hectares of a farm, but this is not a full farm approach, for example. And each member country in Europe, they define different eco schemes which they want to fund or provide for funding for farmers. So there are quite different situations and types of eco schemes in different parts of Europe. I just want to mention, well, the eco schemes, we have something which exists over, well, more than 10, 15 years already. Also the agro-environmental schemes, and inside there are some schemes which are really more farming systems, whole systems oriented, where they look at whole farm things, which could be then also considered as, well, that's farms or hectares which are under agroecology. Then coming to France, to an example which I like personally very well, which was coming also from the French policy for, well, boosting a little bit agroecology with the French law for agroecology in 2014. Well, just to remind, France was the first country in the world which had a law for agroecology. So farmers practicing agroecology in France with the so-called GIEE groups, that's environmental and economic interest groups. So that's, there is some, well, they're recognized by the French state and there is some funding. And so this funding can support farmers, supply chain actor groups, which are transitioning towards agroecology in multi-annual projects. Just some numbers from January 2021, there were almost a little bit more than 750 active groups with about 12,000 farms involved. And these groups cover often in average 20 farmers, but can range between 10 to even more than 100. But can we consider them all as full agroecological farms? And with this also say, all this is full agroecology. Something which is, I know it's debated, especially today. There is a debate in the parliament or somewhere about the high environmental value labeled farms in France. So to get this label, there is a different level label, and here we speak about the third level label. So it's a combination of, you get this label if you have a combination of result objectives which are measured using different environmental performance indicators, so which are on conservation of biodiversity, but then different crop protection management, fertilization management, and irrigation management. So farmers implement agricultural practices which should be particularly based on the principles of agroecology. And this labeling should guarantee that these practices throughout the farm preserve ecosystems and limit pressure on the environment. So far, if you go to the right, you see a little bit the data on how many, which are the main type of productions which are labeled under this high environmental value label. So the main dominating one is wine, then cereals with maybe 1/5, as well as fruits, and 25% maybe livestock farms. And there is even, well, some products which are labeled with this or have this label. So just half a year ago, we had almost 40,000 farms which have this label, which would reflect on almost 10% of the farms and 9% of the agricultural area. But again, are they all full agroecological farms? And as I said, there is some criticism by some stakeholders as it's too light and it's sort of a greenwashing that they are doing much more under the environmental side, but which are not fully implemented because the label allows to be maybe at the intermediary level only. And I see already that there are comments coming regarding the high environmental value. Then another one, which is, I think, important for France, but which I think can also be very interesting if it's more looked at the European level, these geographical indications and the question in relation to the agroecological development. So there are these protected destination of origin, so products which come from a certain area, or geographical indications. So on the right-hand side, you see some photos where me and my colleague, when we take the agroecology students to the southeast of France, they are different of these geographical indications with quite nice products. And I just want to mention one here, it's a Banon cheese, which if we look a little bit about all their practices and what is behind also the guidelines for producing these cheese, for me, it could be an agroecological geographical indication. And then there are others which already looked at other, well, like Ruggeri et al., about how far these geographical indication systems here applied to vineyards provide support to make the transition towards agroecology. Then this is not with any hectares or numbers now, but from having carried out, well, within a larger European projects and also together with Agroecology Europe, this mapping of agroecology in Europe, we have a large diversity of initiatives, well, which are farmers and different actor groups, local food initiatives, networks and NGOs, education and teaching organizations. So many of these initiatives are not directly identified with the term agroecology, but they are agroecological. And there are just a very quick glimpse of some initiatives. On the top left, you see the community-supported agriculture system from Sweden. In the middle top from Slovenia, an association of organic growers and processors. On the right, Solidarity Economic District, which wants to go towards agroecology more in Italy. On the bottom left, the Andalusian Seed Network cultivating biodiversity. In the middle, the Regenerative Agricultural School from Denmark, and from Moldova. On the bottom right, an association for eco and artisan consumers and producers. So you see they don't use the term agroecology, but all these have agroecological approaches and different elements of agroecology. So if somebody is interested to see more about these invisible initiatives, but which are in agroecology, you can get from these books, which can be downloaded freely from the internet, which are covering different countries. With this brings me to the conclusions. Well, I have just one-line conclusions for Bolivia because I did not know exactly what Georgina will tell, but while we saw there are many different examples or types of examples for silent agroecology in Bolivia. For Europe, I can clearly say there are many initiatives and cases, although many not using the term agroecology. Georgina also mentioned there is a question of statistics which are missing strongly, or what can be counted as hectares under agroecological practices and not only having farms. And also, well, how can we count if we don't have a clear definition on what is an agroecological farm? But overall, I think we have already much more agroecology than we think, and I think we heard it a little bit today. But the final question would be, how can we make the invisible visible? And with this, together with Georgina, we thank you for your attention, and we are happy now to respond to your questions or to the debate we are starting now. And I will now stop sharing the thing that we have. Yeah. Okay. Good. So maybe, Vincent, there were already some people I see which are raising their hand. So maybe you can manage, or if you saw some of the in the chats already, some questions which can be either the person itself themselves they ask directly, or you just tell us which question Georgina and I should treat.
Okay, thanks. So there is no question for the moment in the chat. There is one comment about HEV that it's big critics for biological agriculture in France, like it's a false label killing AB. So maybe you want to react, but otherwise there is a question from Tonje, I guess. So you can open your mic and ask a question.
Yeah, Tony, please, if you can.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much, Carolina, for a very interesting talk. Also, Alexander. I'm following from Mitke in Bolivia, actually. So I'm sending some extra greetings to Carolina from her own home country. My question is kind of similar to the last question that was put on the slide. It's a big question of how can we unsilence the agroecology that's now silenced. I think it's an important question to discuss because I think Georgina makes a very clear case for the value of these agroecological practices and the knowledges that are now gone unrecognized. And it's not a coincidence in our system that these initiatives are silenced. That's how I interpreted it from her presentation, and I agree. So the question is, how do we move beyond that? How can we unsilence the silenced agroecology? And if the question is too large, maybe you can focus on what we as young researchers can do and what our role is in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Tonya. And well, I would like to say that for this and other particular complex situations, it's how it's different sectors have a responsibility to contribute to resolve it. I do believe that the ones who we are in the academia, for instance, we really need to reflect on the methodologies. I do believe that the methodological dimension is very important to go beyond the restrictive normative indicators that we have a few, also to consider to make the effort to really characterize and appraise the complexity of the agroecological systems that we are working with and the different contributions that they have, not only from for instance, a food security perspective that is very much well researched, methodologies are there, but also, for instance, for more complex visions like food sovereignty, territorial management, even to appraise it from a food system perspective. So there is lots still to do in terms of methodological approach in agroecology. In relation to policymakers, for instance, I would say policy making needs to stop. And I am talking, of course, I from where I am, from the region where I am, I believe policy making should and regulation should stop fiscalizing agroecology and promoting more. Certification and bio inputs are relevant for a specific context. The farmers are dealing with, for instance, how to reach the market. They don't have infrastructure. They don't have the equipment. They need also to deal with aspects related to seeds. So just to mention a few, also public procurement. That will be very important. In Latin America, we have examples. In Brazil, for instance, very robust. Also, there is emerging legislation about ecology, for instance, in Colombia and other countries. Public procurement will help to make invisible this food contribution to of our ecology. And I can consumers, citizens, we have also a role in relation to how to make more visible from the appreciation valuation, but not only from the monetary perspective. So I would say different actors have different roles, and this is not going to be solved as many other issues just because one sector does something. It requires complementary actions from the different sectors, and it's something that we still need to talk a lot.
I think I will not add in addition on it, but maybe go to a next question, or at least I saw, well, Vincent, you raised your hand.
Yes.
Or Paula,
So
yeah, Vincent.
there are some questions in the chat. I will read it to you, and maybe we can then give the floor to Paula so that you have three questions.
Maybe take first one question from the chat, and then we go Paula, and then we go again back to the chat.
As you wish. So there is a question about tools to assess agroecology. What are your views about characterizing agroecology farms using FAO tape tools or other tools? And have you been using that in Bolivia or in Europe? There is another question about pastoralism in agroecology. That seems to be something that is quite silent. So how best can we define agroecology in the pastoralist context? And there was also a more reflection about the fact that the elements that are silent are maybe silent because they are not valued in the current system and paradigm. But I don't know if we need to value them in this kind of paradigms. Anyway, that's the question in the chat.
You want to start with the tools?
Yeah, okay. Well, the tools are, as their name says, tools, and they have different purposes. There is no one tool, there is no the tool, and that's something also perhaps related to what Tonio was asking. Something very important in agroecology is this methodological pluralism. There is no one tool or one framework that is going to help us to answer the different questions and situations. So we have to see the context, and the purpose of applying certain methodologies and certain tools. And something that we were also discussing this morning at the group of class, I think, Sarah, is also to contribute to the implementation methodologies to support self-reflection on what we are doing, not only for externals and third actors to evaluate what we are doing. So being said that, I do believe that TAPE has strengths, but also as different methodologies has its limitations, and it could be good for certain contexts and is helping in the case studies to visualize how important and relevant and different and advanced is the performance of agroecology in comparison to other production systems, which is very good. But it will not answer all the questions that we have. And from SOCL, I could say that we participated in the last workshop that was organized to review and provide feedback on TAPE. For instance, there are aspects on gender and youth that need to be improved, but that's a good thing. It's a good thing that methodologies are not finalized, and it still give us the room to keep discussing. And if I may, I would like also to address something about pastoralism and agroecology. That also is related to, for instance, artisanal fishing or gathering by indigenous peoples. That there are, I think it's something very important to start with, that those systems are based on territorial management. Based on that, they are all not only managing the biophysical elements, but also very much are into the social organization and the institutions that they build for and processes to manage those territories. I think, and pastoralism, particularly in agroecology, we have a very important gap. How to approach it, I would like to say something very simple, which is, let's start talking with pastoralists. As we need to also let's start talking with youth, and let's start talking with women to actually know what they are doing and how that's related to agroecology from our vision and from their vision. There is a special issue that we are preparing for the agroecology and sustainable food systems, and there is few articles on pastoralisms. So this is a preview on the special edition, and I think these kind of materials that help us to we have very little documented about that. So let's also document to have more insights, hopefully from a participatory action approach to start answering these questions and to see the similarities, the parallels, and perhaps how they can complement and support each other, pastoralism and agroecology.
I will just add one word to the tools, because while TAPE was mentioned and Georgina said, well, we should not just rely and think about one tool, but there is, of course, the OASIS tool also, which was developed by Agroecology Europe in different projects, which is also for characterizing farms and a little bit where they are going towards agroecology on a transition. But we never should use these tools to say, that's an agroecological farm and this is not. It's more for the characterization and to see where progress can be made, and also from the perspective of the farmers themselves. So there are these tools, and I think they are incomplete and unprecise still, which is normal, I think. Probably we'll never have a tool which we are satisfied completely. And I know there was just a workshop at the Oxford Farming Congress in 2 weeks ago, where this was discussed with the different types of tool. But now I would ask Paula, you raised your hand, that you can ask your question or comment, whatever you have.
Hello, hi, nice to meet you, Georgina. Yeah, I would like to know what is your opinion about I will use this term, legalization of agroecology, or let's say to use tools, let's call tools, that tend to standardize agroecology. So from one side, you answered already on your question before, but let's say on your answer before. But in Europe, there is starting for me in a very, I'm very worried about a process to make agroecology standardized, no? So that is not to improve the definition. It's really from the legal point of view. For example, it's just released now the law in, for example, in the region of Sicily, that define what is agroecology and what is not, with the specific 10% of the surface must be that, the 20% of the surface must be this. What do you think about this process, and how can we somehow, can I say, modify, because from one side is to talk about principle and practice, and completely different from my personal point of view is to make a law that define, or even more international unification norm that will influence the whole world. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Paula. Well, that's very, very important and very challenging. And standardization, by all means, it's the antithesis of the agroecological principles, because we are talking about biodiversity and recognizing biodiversity and complexity as positive attributes in comparison to simplification. So this standardization is problematic, certainly. And that also is a symptom, I would say, also of the limitations that public administration and regulation has. The reason why, for instance, in our countries, we have very little public investment in agroecology is because it doesn't fit the very strict classifications of what a public project is, because the social outcomes, and particularly the so-called environmental results, are very difficult to measure. They are long-term. Sometimes they are yes, they are not grasped in material aspects and with just few concrete indicators. So unfortunately, most of the legislation has been a role in trying to unify only one view or few views of how agroecology should be implemented, more than what is the interpretation, what the definition of agroecology. The problem, in my view, is that they try to restrict how it's going to be implemented on the ground. And then when you have, for instance, very diverse agroforestry systems, and the transition is in 2 years instead of 5, then you are not agroecological. Or, things that really do not fit in the context, or if you don't apply certain bio inputs, you are not agroecological. Well, perhaps you have so much biodiversity and you don't need bio inputs. And so I would say something very difficult how we address this, because Agroecology did not depend on public policy to advance. Public policy is not, many times, is not the right lever for agroecology. Sometimes it becomes a barrier. Agroecology is going to continue with or without policy, particularly in the global south. So now that agroecology is in fashion and many countries are receiving funding and they want to have policies for regulating agroecology, what I would say is very important public construction, public participation to have in the different pieces at least certain level of nuance and consideration of the differences within the countries at social level, at regional level. This is one thing. Another thing is it's something that's very harmful is that our ecology regulation restricts to certification and bio-input construction and facilities. That's what I meant to say is bio-input production facilities. That's very restrictive. This is the recipe for national cooptation of our ecology. And that can be, in my experience, can be somehow resolved if there is the political will and the budget to carry out public consultations, participatory processes, not only for the consultation itself, but for the approval of the final text, and particularly for the implementation. So it's something I feel myself, it's an incomplete answer, but I can summarize that it's a very, very complex but important issue, and stress that agroecology is not the only key for transition. Sometimes could be a barrier. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I just want to share what's going on in the chat. So
Yeah.
first, there were some comments regarding standardization and the issue with that. So thank you for your answer now, that I think it covers the point. There was also someone saying that she was at the Oxford Real Farming Conference last week, and that's this kind of moment where people can network and where can silent agroecology be unsilent in a way. And there was an interesting question regarding do you think that that we can say that part of this silence in agroecology and in research and policy is the cultural aspect of agroecology, such as worldview, cosmology, etc., which is silent? And how do you think that those views can be linked to practices and knowledge system?
It's on the cultural dimension.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
cosmovision thing, for example.
Yes. Well, generally speaking, in the global south, we have more recognition to the intangibles of our culture and our ecology, because yes, as mentioned, the First Nation, the original, the indigenous peoples are part of our complex and vivid societies, but there is a more growing in the sense that and we see it on the field. The tangible part of our ecology is not only this very beautiful spiritual dimension, which is very important, but also it becomes very practical, because one of the main motivations to keep going in our ecology, even in a very adverse context that, for instance, policies set up, is the conviction and is the attachment to the land, is the sense of community, the different values beyond food, of course, food, but also beyond food. So these intangibles, culture, symbols, have a very important practical implementation of what we do. It's an invisible, yes, I fully agree, because also in and here comes the methodologies again, and also the narratives. We are very much used to give value to what is measurable, quantifiable, and we need also different narratives and different methodologies to contribute to visualize that. And that also science tells us. Let me put an example. We know that certain things harm us. Plastics the plastic that in which we eat our food, the polyester that is our clothes, with due apologies, those who smoke, etc. Do we have so much information about pesticides? Do we have so much information about that? There is no change because of knowing, but because of feeling and having a real experience. So there's a scientific information and proof about that. So these intangibles are hugely important. We need new methodologies, new narratives to put them on the table. And I would like to say that creating living experiences and arts is helping us a lot to work in this integrality of the being, not only this physical dimension, but also these more intangibles and feelings. And we are using in Latin America and in Africa as well, lots of arts as a pedagogic and also research strategy and also social mobilization strategy. So we can also explore more on that. Thanks.
You have more, Vincent, which
No,
the
there is
chat
no more
you want to
question
ask?
in the chat.
Might look at for one more question, but because we are now well finished in time. A lot in the meantime, I would say, well, on the other side, I know I have a little bit sometimes a different perspective, which I did not make completely out of my mind yet. But if we want to have policies, that's a European perspective again. Policies which support much more agroecology, for example, under the Common Agricultural Policy, then it would be to qualify and where can the funding go to, and also well, the subsidy system we have, and then we would need to define much more what is under agroecology and not. So there is, on the one side, it's a trap. On the other side, this could help to boost some farmers to do things more at larger scale or whatever. But I also have not a clear mind yet on my side. But I know, well, with Paula, we discussed it already several times that not that we don't get a standardization or a labeling on agroecology. So from my side, I don't know exactly. Depends on in which direction it could go and who is defining it. For example, if it's just to get some subsidies for certain practices, maybe, but not, of course, for qualifying what exactly, like for the organic, have a certification system. I think that would be problematic, at least as I see it at the moment. Any question from the room here also, just that we are not ignoring you here? Not, we can also do it just when we finish this.
Just have maybe one question. Because you are really focused mainly on agroecology, and I just wondered when the food system approach appeared as necessary to unsilent also this silent agroecology, or when did it appear as a potential partner to foster agroecology?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think it's important because it actually it has practical implications almost in every context. When we are doing, for instance, participatory action research, and we are working, and I can say a current example that we are working on characterizing the different biophysical and economic aspects of agroecological agroforestry systems. Then comes the issue of, okay, where to sell? Where to sell, how to reach the markets, how to add value. Just from that simple question, a food system perspective comes. Or also, and it should be I do believe in the different initiatives of implementation that we have, because the benefits of agroecology do not finish in the lines and the borders of the plot or the agroecosystem, and the agroecosystem doesn't have barriers that prevent the contextual challenges also come into the plot, into the dynamics, and having the food system approach is just help us to have a more realistic approach to what actually the dynamics are. Women are participating in the seeding, in the production, they commercialize, they also are very much on other sometimes shared responsibilities related to food preparation. So there you have a full elements of food systems. And in policy making, for instance, if we want agroecology to thrive and to be amplified, we need to think about the infrastructure. Do farmers have, for instance, access to water? I'm talking about once again from the Latin American perspective. How they are doing, what their knowledge are they applying to resolve certain issues? Do they have roads to access the markets? When they reach the markets, do they have a place where they can be identified easily? Who consume these products? How can public procurement can contribute to democratize the access to healthy food? So all of those are issues from a food system perspective. If we don't have this food system perspective in research, in policy making, project implementation, social organization, the efforts that for amplifying agroecology are going to be very restrictive, because those are the daily issues that farmers, consumers, citizens deal with. So in my view, that's the kind of logical way to go. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I think that's a good last point and comment. And with this, I think, well, we are 5 minutes over time. We can finish this webinar conference. And so I highly thank again, Georgina, for participating and preparing this talk with us. So I think there's still a lot of things to discuss later on. Also, thanks to Agroecology Europe for co-organizing, and especially to Vincent, administrating a little bit the chat. So maybe if you can register what was in the chats and send us the comments, because we had no time to look at all the comments or questions. And I think also of the contribution, of course, from the people participating with their comments or asking these questions. And with this, I hope that was a new initiative to think about what can be more behind the silent agroecology, which we might discuss in the future in other conferences or webinars or meetings or whatever. So thank you for your participation and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Leo?